The night was restless inside the alien outpost, a place filled with sharp lights, strange metal walls, and shadows that whispered of cruelty. The humans who had been taken there were not treated as equals, not even as enemies worth respect. They were little more than toys, used for the amusement of the powerful alien lords who controlled this sector of the galaxy. Among them stood Daniel Hayes, a soldier who had fought on too many battlefields already. His body bore scars, his mind carried heavier ones, but nothing had prepared him for what they handed to him that night. It was supposed to be a game, a cruel joke. The aliens brought her forward under the glow of cold blue light. She was small, fragile, and trembling. Her skin shimmered faintly with silver undertones, her hair like strands of pale fire, but her body was marked with bruises and cruel burns. They pushed her at him roughly, laughing in their guttural language, their voices scraping the air like broken glass. One alien sneered, translating just enough for the humans to understand. "A gift," he said mockingly. "For you, human. Broken. Worthless. Use her, or throw her away. It makes no difference." Daniel caught her before she could fall to the ground, her weight barely anything in his arms. He looked into her eyes, and what he saw there silenced the alien laughter inside him. Fear, yes, but deeper than that. Something raw, something almost extinguished but not gone. Hope. She had been beaten, degraded, treated like nothing. Yet when her eyes met his, she waited, not with expectation, but with the faintest whisper of a question. Would he be like them? Or would he choose differently? The other humans glanced away, some unable to stomach what they were seeing. They all knew what the aliens wanted. They wanted Daniel to prove he was no better, to break her further, to show that compassion was a weakness unique to fools. It was entertainment to them, watching humans make the same brutal choices their captors had made. But Daniel was not about to play their game. He lowered her gently onto the ground and spoke in a quiet voice. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you." She flinched at his words, as if the very sound of kindness was foreign, a language she had long forgotten. The aliens erupted in laughter again, jeering, mocking him. One shouted, "He thinks she is worth saving. Human softness. Pathetic." Their leader stepped closer, tall and skeletal, his skin covered in armor-like plates. His eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light. He leaned down until his face was inches from Daniel's and hissed, "Then she will be your burden. Let us see how long before you break, like all the rest." They left her there with him, thinking it would be punishment. Daniel stared after them, then looked back at the girl. She was shaking, whispering words in a language he couldn't understand. Still, the tone was clear, it was an apology. She expected him to strike her for it. Instead, Daniel tore a piece of his ragged shirt and began wrapping the worst of her wounds. His hands were rough, clumsy, but careful, and for the first time in what must have been years, she didn't pull away. Hours passed in silence. Around them, the other prisoners whispered, their eyes flicking toward Daniel and the girl. A strange unease filled the camp. For so long they had seen only cruelty, despair, and betrayal. But now, in one simple act of defiance, Daniel had created something dangerous: hope. That night, while the aliens drank and celebrated their cruelty, Daniel made a promise to himself. He didn't know who she was, what race she belonged to, or how much strength was left in her broken frame. But he knew this: she had been given to him as a joke, as a symbol of worthlessness. He would turn that joke into rebellion. He would keep her alive, no matter the cost. And if the aliens thought humans would always bend, always break, then they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The girl's fragile hand touched his wrist before sleep claimed her. Her eyes, heavy with exhaustion, locked with his for a final second. No words passed between them, but Daniel understood. She was his responsibility now. And more than that, she was the spark that could change everything. Because in a place ruled by cruelty, the smallest act of kindness was the deadliest weapon of all. The room felt heavy with silence after the alien guards left him alone with the girl. She remained motionless on the floor, her breathing faint, her body bruised and fragile as if the world had already broken her before she had even lived. Daniel stood still, fists clenched at his sides, heart hammering with a rhythm that reminded him of gunfire. He didn't ask for this. He didn't come here to play the games of a cruel empire. Yet here he was, staring down at a life they had tossed at him like trash, like she meant nothing. His mind screamed at him to walk away, to let the empire's cruelty consume itself, but something inside him burned too brightly for that. He knelt beside her, his voice low, almost unsure. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids flickered open slowly, revealing eyes that glowed faintly with a strange, alien shimmer. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, both beautiful and haunting, filled with the weight of someone who had suffered too long. She tried to speak, her lips trembling, but the words came out as broken fragments of a language he didn't understand. Still, Daniel didn't need a translator to hear the fear in her tone. He knew that kind of fear. It was the kind people carried when they expected no mercy, no hope, only more pain. He reached for the water flask on his belt and lifted her head gently. She resisted at first, flinching like a beaten animal, but then her thirst won, and she drank in small, desperate sips. The dim cell walls seemed to close in tighter with every breath. Daniel's jaw tightened as his mind wandered back to the guard's mocking words. A gift. For fun. The thought made him sick. He was human, yes, but more than that. He was a soldier who had seen too much, lost too much. And he knew this wasn't just some random act of cruelty. This was a test. They wanted to see how he would react, to measure whether humanity's heart was weakness or strength. He set the flask aside and studied her more closely. The girl's skin bore strange marks, not just bruises but scars etched in patterns almost ceremonial. Her wrists had faint glowing bands, like remnants of shackles burned into her flesh. Whoever she was, she had not been free for a long time. "You're safe," he whispered, though he wasn't sure it was true. "Not while I'm here." The words felt like a vow, heavier than iron, spoken into the air as if daring the empire itself to challenge him. The girl blinked slowly, her expression unreadable, but for the first time, the terror in her eyes softened just enough to let something else show, doubt mixed with the smallest flicker of hope. It was fragile, but it was real. Hours passed, the cell's shadows stretching long across the cold floor. Daniel tried to piece together a plan, but he had almost nothing. No weapons, no allies, no way of knowing who this girl truly was. Yet his instincts screamed that she was important, far more than the Empire wanted him to know. He thought of Earth, of the lessons drilled into him since childhood. Never let cruelty become normal, never let the powerful crush the weak without standing in their way. That was what made humans different. And maybe, just maybe, that difference was why the aliens feared them so much. A soft sound pulled him from his thoughts, a whisper, fragile but clear this time. The girl spoke again, and though he couldn't understand every word, one stood out. A name. Hers. "Lyra," she said, her voice cracking. She touched her chest lightly, repeating it again. "Lyra." Daniel nodded, the corner of his mouth tightening into something close to a smile. "Lyra," he repeated. He placed a hand over his own chest. "Daniel." For a moment, the weight of the Empire, the cruelty of their world, faded just enough for something human and real to exist between them, a connection built not on power but on choice. But the silence shattered when heavy footsteps echoed outside the cell. Daniel tensed, his body instinctively shifting to shield the girl. The metallic door groaned open, spilling harsh light inside. 3 guards stepped in, their faces hidden behind masks, weapons gleaming. One of them pointed at Lyra with a sneer in his voice. "Time for the next game. The master wants her back." Lyra's weak hands clutched at Daniel's sleeve, her eyes widening with silent terror. In that instant, Daniel made his decision, not out of strategy, not out of calculation, but out of something deeper, something human. He stood tall, moving between her and the guards, his voice steady and sharp. "No. She stays." The guards froze for a second, then laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "You think you have a choice, human?" one spat, stepping forward. But Daniel didn't move. His stance alone radiated a defiance they hadn't expected. The Empire had handed him a broken girl, thinking he would either break her further or discard her like the rest. Instead, he had chosen to protect her. And that choice, simple as it seemed, was the first stone thrown into the calm surface of a lake. Ripples that would spread, far and wide, until the Empire itself felt them. As the guards raised their weapons, Daniel's fists clenched, his mind racing. He knew he couldn't fight them all, not yet. But he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't letting them take her. Not now. Not ever. The Empire had given him their cruel gift. What they didn't realize was that in doing so, they had awakened something far more dangerous than they imagined, the unshakable resolve of a human who refused to let cruelty win. And in the shadows of that cold cell, a war far larger than either of them understood had just begun. The cell was cold, dark, and smelled of rust and damp stone, yet it had become their world. He had dragged the broken alien girl here after refusing to leave her in the blood-soaked arena. At first, she had been more dead than alive, her skin pale, her body trembling, and her strange violet eyes hollow like burnt-out stars. She barely spoke, and when she did, it was in short whispers of a language he couldn't understand. Still, he tended to her. He used the little scraps of cloth he could find to bandage her wounds, offered her the water ration they gave him, and even shared the stale food meant to keep him weak. He wasn't sure why he cared. Maybe it was because leaving her to die would have made him no better than the monsters who had thrown her into his arms. Maybe it was because she was the only living being here who wasn't trying to kill him. Or maybe, deep down, he knew she was more than just some gift. The guards had laughed at first. "He feeds it," one sneered through the bars. "He thinks it will love him back." They mocked him, betting on how long before the girl would die in his arms, or worse, betray him for her own survival. But night after night, she held on. She began to heal, slowly, painfully, like a plant clawing its way out of poisoned soil. And with every passing day, her eyes followed him more. She studied him when he trained against the walls, when he stared into the ceiling thinking of Earth, when he whispered curses at the guards under his breath. She seemed to be waiting for something, waiting for him. One night, when the guards were gone, she reached out her hand. Thin, trembling, but determined. He hesitated before taking it. Her skin was warm, almost burning with life, though her frame was fragile as glass. She whispered something, her alien words soft and urgent. He didn't understand, but he felt the meaning. Gratitude, trust, and something else, something that should never have existed between a human prisoner and a discarded alien girl. A bond. That bond deepened fast. She began to copy his words, broken English tumbling from her lips in strange, musical tones. "Water," she would say, and smile when he gave her a sip. "Safe," she whispered, pressing her head against his shoulder. It wasn't just language, it was survival. She clung to him not as property, not as a slave, but as someone who had given her something she had never known before, choice. The guards noticed the change. Their laughter grew crueler, their bets shifted. "He is soft," they mocked. "He will break sooner." But the truth was the opposite. For the first time since he had been thrown into this nightmare, he had a reason to keep fighting. Not just for himself, but for her. The first test came sooner than expected. They dragged him into the arena again, shoving weapons into his hands and releasing beasts that looked like armored wolves with burning eyes. The crowd cheered, waiting for blood. But this time, he fought differently. He wasn't just surviving. He was fighting to live, for her. His movements were faster, sharper. His rage burned hotter. Every strike he landed carried the thought of her fragile body waiting in the cell. Every breath he took was a promise he wouldn't let them take him from her. When the beasts lay dead around him and he stood bleeding but unbroken, the crowd roared in disbelief. He didn't hear them. He only thought of getting back to her. When he returned, she rushed to him, limping, weak, but desperate. She tore strips of her own tattered clothes to bind his wounds, her small hands shaking as she worked. She whispered the same word again and again. "Stay. Stay." It wasn't a command. It was a plea. He realized then how much she feared losing him. He had been chosen as her protector against his will, but now he chose her, too. That night, something shifted. He no longer saw her as the broken girl handed to him as a cruel joke. He saw her as a survivor, like him. She was scarred, weak, and fragile, but inside her burned the same fire he carried, the refusal to bow to the cruelty of this place. And in her, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. But hope was dangerous. It made him reckless. He began to plan. Quietly, secretly. He watched the guards' routines, the way the gates opened, the way the chains rattled before a fight. He traced the layout of the arena in his mind, memorizing every corner, every shadow. She watched him, her eyes sharp, as if she understood what he was thinking even without words. Sometimes she would point to things he had missed, a weak hinge, a loose bar, a blind spot in the guard rotation. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was helping. It was then he realized, the bond between them wasn't one-sided. She wasn't his burden. She was his ally. And maybe, just maybe, the two of them together could escape this nightmare. But the galaxy was cruel, and nothing stayed hidden for long. One evening, as he sat beside her, whispering soft words she barely understood, a shadow fell over the bars. The guard captain stood there, eyes glinting with malice. "I see now," the alien sneered. "The pet has tamed the beast. Or perhaps the beast has fallen for his pet." The captain's voice grew colder. "Very well. Let's test this bond of yours. Tomorrow, human, you will fight again. But this time, the girl fights too." The words froze him. He turned to her, and her violet eyes widened with fear. She was still too weak, too broken to fight in the arena. They both knew it. Yet the guards didn't care. They wanted a show. They wanted to see if he would still protect her when survival demanded sacrifice. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with her in the dark, holding her trembling hands, whispering promises he didn't know how to keep. For the first time, fear cut deep into his chest. Not fear for himself, but fear of losing her. Because somewhere between the broken gift and the bond they had built, she had become something more. She wasn't just his reason to fight. She was his reason to live. And the arena was waiting to take her from him. The alien girl's breathing was ragged, uneven, like each inhale was a fight against her own body. He had been tending to her wounds for hours now, using nothing but scraps of cloth, heat from a broken torch, and a strange gel he had found in one of the alien supply crates. She still hadn't spoken, but her eyes had changed. The emptiness that had lived inside them when she was first thrown at his feet was fading. Now, there was something else there. Pain, yes, but also a faint flicker of trust. And that was dangerous. Because the men who had given her to him had not done it as kindness. They wanted him to break. They wanted him to throw her aside, like garbage. But he hadn't. And now he knew that decision might have just put him in even greater danger. The guards outside the cell laughed often. Sometimes they would bang on the metal walls just to hear her flinch. Other times, they would peer in through the slit in the door, their glowing yellow eyes glinting with cruel amusement. They weren't watching her anymore. They were watching him. Watching to see how far a human could go before he snapped. He kept his face cold, unshaken, every time they looked. He had learned quickly that showing weakness was a death sentence here. Still, in the silence of the nights, when the alien girl's trembling body leaned against him for warmth, the weight of it all pressed down on him. He didn't even know her name. She didn't have the strength to give it. But he had made himself a promise. He would not let her die. Not here. Not as someone's twisted entertainment. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. The door to the cell screeched open, and light spilled across the floor. Two guards stepped in, their weapons slung lazily over their shoulders, grinning with sharp teeth. One pointed at the girl, barked something in their guttural alien tongue, then shoved a chain toward him. It didn't take a translator to understand what they wanted. They were taking her. For what, he didn't want to guess. For a moment, he froze. His mind screamed at him not to act, to let it happen, to survive, to not do anything that would get him killed. But when the girl's wide, terrified eyes locked on his, the decision was already made. He stood. The guards laughed, thinking he was obeying. Then, in a sudden burst of fury, he swung the heavy chain like a whip. The metal links smashed against the first guard's face, sending him sprawling with a sickening crunch. The second guard barely had time to react. The human lunged, driving his shoulder into the alien's chest, slamming him back against the wall. The girl screamed weakly behind him, but he didn't stop. He wrestled the weapon from the alien's grip, twisting until bones snapped beneath his hands. By the time the second guard collapsed, choking, both of them were down. Blood pooled on the floor. His chest heaved. His hands shook. He knew what he had just done wasn't bravery, it was a declaration of war. The others outside would come soon. There would be no going back. Slowly, he turned to her. She was staring at him as if she couldn't believe what she had just seen. And then, for the first time, she spoke. Her voice was broken, weak, but the word was clear. A single name. Her name. He whispered it back to her, committing it to memory like a sacred vow. Then he picked up the fallen weapon, checked the corridor beyond the open cell door, and offered her his hand. The game the aliens had been playing was over. Now, it was survival. And for the first time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for her too. The alarm began almost instantly. A shrill, metallic howl that shook the corridor and lit the walls in pulsing red. The human's heart pounded, his grip tightening on the alien weapon he barely knew how to use. The girl clung to his side, her thin frame trembling, but her steps were steady. She understood, just as he did, there was no more time. The guards would be coming. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. And he had killed 2 of their own. That meant death for both of them, no trial, no mercy. The corridor stretched ahead, an endless maze of steel and shadows. He moved fast, his instincts sharper than ever. Every corner was a gamble. Would it lead to freedom or a trap? He pressed on, every nerve alive, forcing his breathing into silence. Behind him, the girl's soft steps echoed like whispers in the chaos. She said nothing, but he could feel her trust growing heavier with every second. He wasn't just leading her out, he was carrying her hope, fragile as glass. The first squad of guards appeared at the far end. Their glowing weapons hummed, light flickering as they raised them in unison. For one suspended heartbeat, time froze. Then the human lifted the stolen rifle and pulled the trigger. A beam of blue fire tore through the air, slamming into the chest of the nearest alien. The others roared, scattering to the walls, but he didn't stop. He fired again and again, forcing them back, his accuracy fueled not by training but by desperation. One beam struck a console, sending sparks showering across the hall. The aliens hesitated, and that was enough. He grabbed the girl's arm and pulled her through the smoke. They ran. Every door, every turn seemed like it could be the end. Sirens wailed louder, echoing through the fortress. His mind worked furiously, mapping the layout, searching for patterns. He had studied their routines during the long nights in the cell, every echo of footsteps, every shift of the guards. Now, that memory became his guide. He led her down a side passage, into a service tunnel where the alarms sounded softer. For a brief moment, silence returned. He leaned against the wall, trying to steady his breathing. The girl was staring at him again, her eyes wide but fierce now, not broken like before. She said a word, 2 words, perhaps. He couldn't understand them, but he felt their meaning. Keep going. He nodded. And then they moved again. The deeper they went, the stranger the fortress became. Pipes hissed with steam, machines clattered in the walls, and strange symbols glowed faintly along the floors. This was no prison. It was something older, something darker. He could feel it. The air itself felt heavy, as if the place was alive, watching them. And in his gut, he knew, escaping would not be as simple as finding a door. This place had been built to hold secrets. Secrets they weren't meant to discover. The next chamber proved it. They burst into a wide room, lined with tanks of shimmering liquid. And inside those tanks floated shapes. Not alien. Not like the guards. No, these were different. Too familiar. Too human. He froze. The girl gasped, her body jerking as if she had seen a ghost. In the green light of the tanks, faces stared back at him. Human faces. Men. Women. Children. Suspended, asleep, or maybe dead. His stomach twisted, his blood ran cold. How could this be? Humanity was supposed to be unknown to them. A mystery. Yet here were dozens, preserved like specimens. The girl tugged at his arm, urging him onward, her voice sharp with urgency. She knew this place. She knew what it meant. And suddenly, he realized the cruel truth. She wasn't just given to him as a toy, as a cruel gift. She was part of this secret. She was part of whatever dark plan these aliens were building. The sound of boots thundered closer, breaking his thoughts. The guards were nearly upon them. He looked once more at the floating faces, pressed his lips together, and pulled the girl toward the far exit. Answers would come later. Survival came first. And as they vanished into the next tunnel, a single thought burned in his mind like fire. Humanity was not as unknown to these creatures as he had believed. They had been preparing for humans. Waiting for them. Studying them. And now, they were coming for him. The hangar shook with violent tremors as alarms screamed across the alien fortress. Smoke poured from the shattered walls, sparks rained down from broken conduits, and the heavy doors buckled under the force of repeated impacts. Mark stood tall at the center of the chaos, his rifle still warm from the last barrage. The alien girl clung to his side, her eyes wide, her body trembling, but her spirit burning stronger than ever. They had fought through hall after hall, bleeding and exhausted, yet refusing to stop. Behind them, alien soldiers lay scattered, their weapons silent, their confidence broken. But ahead, a sound echoed, a steady march, synchronized footsteps of reinforcements. The enemy wasn't done. They were coming in greater numbers, and this time they weren't taking chances. Mark tightened his grip on the rifle. His body screamed with pain, his legs wanted to collapse, but he forced himself forward. He wasn't fighting just to survive anymore, he was fighting for her, the broken girl who had been given to him like an object, treated like nothing. The girl who now stood taller, because he had chosen to see her as someone worth saving. Her hand slid into his, small but steady, and for the first time she whispered, "Don't leave me." Those 3 words sent a fire through his veins stronger than any weapon could. He would never leave her. Not here. Not now. Not ever. The doors exploded inward, and armored warriors stormed inside. They carried heavier weapons, their armor gleaming under the broken lights, their movements cold and precise. The commanders had sent their best. This was meant to crush any last spark of resistance. Mark raised his rifle, but he knew it wouldn't be enough this time. Too many. Too strong. The girl stepped forward, and for a heartbeat, Mark thought she was surrendering. But then he saw it, the glow rising from her skin, faint at first, then brighter, pulsing like living fire. Her broken body, the scars and the marks, had hidden something the aliens never wanted her to discover. Power. A dangerous, forbidden power. And now it was waking up. The warriors hesitated. Even through their armor, they felt it. Fear. The girl's voice, soft yet unshaking, echoed through the hangar. No more chains. No more silence. She raised her hands, and a wave of energy surged out, invisible yet unstoppable. The first line of soldiers were thrown back like toys, their weapons ripped from their grip, their armor crumpled as if crushed by unseen hands. Mark stared in shock, but instead of fear, a fierce pride burned in him. She wasn't broken. She had never been broken. She was something the enemy feared too much to let live, and that was why they had given her away like garbage. They had made a mistake. And now they would pay. The hangar became a storm. Lights burst, steel bent, and the soldiers screamed as their own fortress turned against them. The girl's power roared, her hair whipping in the violent currents of unseen force, her scars glowing with lines of energy. But Mark saw her face, and it wasn't rage that drove her, it was freedom. She wasn't lashing out blindly, she was standing tall, finally refusing to bow. Mark lifted his rifle and stepped beside her. Together they fought, human determination and alien power side by side. Each blast he fired struck true. Each wave she unleashed shattered the enemy's confidence. The reinforcements broke, retreating, their formation collapsing under the storm they couldn't control. But the fortress itself was failing. Walls cracked, flames spread, and explosions ripped through the hangar. The girl's energy was too much for the structure to hold. Mark grabbed her hand again, pulling her toward the escape bay. "We need to go," he shouted, his voice drowned by the chaos. She turned to him, her eyes glowing, yet soft when they met his. For a moment, she hesitated, as if afraid her power would destroy everything around her, including him. But Mark shook his head. "I'm not afraid of you," he said simply. And with those words, she let the energy calm, enough for them to run. The two raced through collapsing corridors, flames chasing them, debris crashing from above. Soldiers who once looked at her with disgust now stared in fear, stepping aside rather than facing her again. They reached the escape hangar, where broken ships lined the docks. Mark spotted a smaller craft still intact. Together they climbed in, systems flickering alive under his frantic hands. Engines roared, and as the fortress erupted behind them, the ship shot into the black void of space, leaving the fire and the screams far behind. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by their heavy breathing. Mark leaned back, exhausted, every muscle screaming for rest. The girl sat beside him, her glowing eyes slowly dimming, her body leaning against his. She was still trembling, but not from fear. She whispered, "You saved me." Mark turned to her, shaking his head. "No," he said quietly. "We saved each other." Outside the window, stars stretched endlessly, a galaxy full of danger and possibility. The enemy would hunt them. The galaxy would whisper about the human who defied them, and the girl who rose from ashes to unleash forbidden power. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the promise Mark had made, that he would never leave her. And as they disappeared into the stars, hand in hand, both broken no longer, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. Because something new had been born that day, hope.